She had not expected the cold to have a sound. In Newfoundland, it had been a wet cold, a pressing cold, the kind that worked through wool and settled in the joints. Here in the Albot foothills, the cold was different. It cracked. Branches snapped in the dark outside the train window, and when the conductor opened the door between cars, the air came through like something solid, like a wall of pressed iron. She was the last one off at Dunore Creek. There were 4 other passengers who had disembarked before her. A family with a screaming child, a man carrying a crate of tools, and they had all been met by someone. A wagon, a hand raised in greeting, a lantern swung low. She stood on the platform with her bag at her feet and watched the station agent lock his door without looking at her. The letter had said he would be there. She read it again, though she had it memorized. I am a farrier by trade. I have a house on the Coldwater Road, 8 miles from the Dunore Creek station. I am not a difficult man. I am asking for someone who can keep a house and who will not mind the quiet. He had signed it with initials only. She had written back and told him she had kept house before, that she did not mind quiet, and that she was 31 years old and had no family left in Bonavista. He had sent a train ticket. She picked up her bag. The platform was empty now. Down the main street, she could see the orange-lit windows of what looked like a livery stable, and beyond it, a hardware store still open. She walked toward the light. The man she found inside the stable was not him. He was older, with a white beard trimmed close, and the careful movements of someone whose knees had been giving him trouble for years. She asked if he knew of a farrier on the Coldwater Road. He looked at her for a moment. That'd be Lowell, he said. He was in Tuesday for horseshoe stock. He paused. Was he supposed to meet you? He was. The old man. He told her his name was Dunston, as if offering something in exchange for what he was about to say, shook his head slowly. Shoe came off his gelding last week. He's been out to the Granger homestead helping them through a foaling. It might be he lost track. She did not say anything. I can take you out in the morning, Dunston said. Too dark now and the road soft at the crossing. She thanked him. He pointed her toward a rooming house run by a woman named Adele Farquhar, 2 doors past the post office, who would not turn anyone out in the cold. Adele Farquhar was a tall woman with a long face and no apparent interest in conversation after 9 in the evening, which suited her fine. She was given a room with a horsehair mattress and a window that looked out onto nothing but dark. She lay on top of the covers with her coat on and listened to the building settle. She had been married before. That was not in the letter she had sent. Her husband had been a fisherman named Bertrand, and he had gone out in October 3 years ago and not come back. And after that, she had stayed in Bonavista for 2 winters more, long enough to understand that staying was not something she could afford to keep doing. She had sold what could be sold. She had not cried at any point she could remember clearly, though she must have at some point. She thought about this sometimes. The crying she couldn't account for. The way you think about a drawer you can no longer find the key to. She slept. In the morning, Dunston came with a buckboard at 7:30. The sky was white and close, the kind of sky that meant snow was thinking about it. She sat beside him on the bench, and they went out of town along a road that ran beside a creek, the water low and dark between ice-shelved banks. He did not speak much, which she appreciated. He pointed out a hawk on a fence post. He told her the name of the creek, the Coldwater, same as the road, and mentioned that in spring it rose enough to flood the lower fields of 3 different farms. She stored this information without knowing why. It seemed like the kind of thing it would matter to know. The house came into view at the end of a long approach, standing back from the road behind 2 large spruce trees. It was not a large house. It was not a small one either. Wood-sided with a low porch and a stone chimney from which a thin column of smoke was rising. To the right of the house, close enough that she could already smell the iron and ash of it, was a forge shed, its double doors standing open. Dunston pulled up on the reins. She climbed down before he offered his hand. "You'll be all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." He turned the buckboard and went back down the road. She stood in the yard with her bag and looked at the open doors of the forge shed. She walked to them. He was inside, working. He was a large man, wider than she had pictured from the letters, though the letters had said nothing about his size. With his back to her and a piece of iron in the vise. His hair was the color of creek mud, dark brown at the roots, pale where it had been bleached. He was not young, he was not old, somewhere in the middle of a life, same as her. He turned when her shadow fell across the floor. He looked her the way men look at things they are trying to understand whether they will work or not. A bridle, a wheel rim, not unkind, not particularly warm. He set down his tool. "You made it," he said. "Train was on time," she said. "You weren't." He nodded once as if this were a reasonable accounting. "Foaling up at Granger's. I lost a day." He pulled off his glove and offered his hand. "Lowell." She shook it. She told him her name. "House is open," he said. He picked up his tool again. "I'll be in by noon." She stood there a moment. He had already turned back to the iron. She picked up her bag and walked to the house. The inside was not what she had expected, and she had not expected much. There was a main room with a cook stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a shelf of books that surprised her. She counted 16 of them, the spines cracked and soft from handling. There was a narrow pantry off the kitchen with some flour, a tin of lard, dried beans, a partial side of salt pork. The floor had been swept recently. Not well, but recently. Upstairs there were 2 rooms. One was clearly his. A narrow bed, a wool blanket, a pair of boots standing at attention beside the door. The other had a rope-strung bed with no mattress and a window with a broken latch that let in a finger's width of cold air. She spent the morning. She found a mattress tick in the back of a closet, filled it from a bag of straw she found in the shed, and dragged it up the stairs. She fixed the window latch with a nail and a piece of heavy wire she found in a coffee tin on the kitchen shelf, which also contained a broken belt buckle, 4 pennies, and a fish hook. She made bread because there was flour and because the stove was already warm, and it seemed like the right use of heat. She put beans to soak. When he came in at noon, the bread was cooling on the shelf. He sat down, looked at it, looked at her. "You didn't have to do all that," he said. "I know." She put 2 plates on the table. They ate salt pork and bread, and she poured water from the pitcher, and he ate quickly the way men who work outdoors eat. Efficiently, without pleasure or displeasure, the way a stove takes wood, he said. "The mattress was in the closet. I found it. I kept meaning to put it up there." He looked at his bread. "I don't go up there much." She didn't ask why. She thought she could figure it out if she needed to, and if she couldn't, she would ask later when asking cost less. He washed his own plate after, which she noted. He went back to the forge. 3 days passed. She learned the house the way she had always learned things, by doing them wrong first and adjusting. The stove ran hot on the left side and cool on the right, so bread had to go in tilted. The pump handle needed to be lifted and held for a count of 5 before it would draw. Porch, step second from the bottom, was soft and would need replacing before spring, and she began keeping a list of such things in a small notebook she had brought from Bona Vista, a habit from the years with Bertrand, when lists had been how she managed the feeling that things were slipping. Lowell came in for meals. He was not a difficult man as advertised. He was not easy either. He spoke when he had something to say and did not try to fill silence with noise. And she found she could work around him without much adjustment, the way 2 people in a small boat learn to shift their weight without speaking. On the 4th day, she was mending one of his shirts, a tear along the shoulder seam where the fabric had given, and he came in and stopped in the doorway and looked at her sitting by the window with the sewing in her hands. "You sew," he said. "Not well," she said. He came in and hung his coat, and she watched him, from the edge of her eye, look at the shirt in her hands. The shirt was old, the fabric was thin, and she had already had to reinforce the area around the tear before she could close it. "That shirt's been like that since August," he said. "It'll hold a while longer now," she said. He sat down. He pulled off his boots. After a moment, he said, "I had a..." She kept sewing. "She died," he said. 3 years ago, February fever." He was quiet. Then, "I kept meaning to get someone in. It took me a while." She looked up from the shirt. He was looking at the stove. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it the plain way, not the elaborate way people sometimes meant it when they wanted credit for their feeling. He nodded. He picked up a book from the shelf. She had noticed he did this in the evenings, one book always coming down and going back, and sat at the table and read. She finished the shirt. She folded it and set it on the chair by the stairs and went to check on the beans. Outside, the wind was starting. She could hear it at the corners of the house, testing. The temperature would drop tonight. She had already banked the stove at the back to keep it through to morning, a thing she had figured out by the 2nd day. and she found herself glad of the knowing, glad of the small competence of it, the way she used to be glad when the boat came in and the count was good. The snow came on the 5th night and did not stop for 2 days. She had been through winter before, but not a prairie winter. Not this particular erasure. The way the fields went white and stayed white. The way the distance flattened until there was no distance, only white and sky and the dark line of the cold water. She stood at the kitchen window the first morning and watched it and felt something she did not have a word for. Not fear. Not homesickness, exactly. Something more like being handed a thing in the dark and not yet knowing the shape of it. Lowell could not get to the forge. He sat at the table and worked on equipment, oiling things, replacing a rivet in a trace strap, sharpening tools. He did not seem bothered by the being inside, which surprised her. She had assumed he would be restless. He was not. He had a particular stillness that she had begun to revise her understanding of. She had first read it as indifference and was now not so sure. On the 2nd day of the storm, she made bannock because she had found a recipe card in the pantry in a woman's handwriting. She knew it was a woman's handwriting, and she knew whose. And she made it because the card was there, and because she knew how, and because the house needed the smell of it. He came in from having checked the horse and stopped when he smelled it. He sat down at the table and ate a piece without speaking. She watched him from the corner of the room where she was hanging up her shawl. After a moment, he said, "My wife made that. I found the card," she said. "I know." He looked at the piece of bannock in his hand. She used to make it on snow days. Said it was the right thing for snow days. "It is," she said. He looked up at her. Something passed across his face that she could not entirely read. Not grief exactly, not pleasure, something in the narrow ground between them where both things grew. He looked back at the bannock. "Thank you," he said. She put the kettle on. The storm broke on the 3rd day. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees in the clearing, and the snow crusted hard. She went out in the afternoon to bring in wood and stood for a moment in the yard, her breath going out in short white clouds, and looked at the land. The hills to the west were clear now, the spruce dark against the snow, the creek a black thread between white banks. The cold had a smell to it. Iron and pine and something underneath that she had no name for, something specific to this particular place at this particular hour. She had begun to think she might be able to stay. This was not a thing she said to anyone. She had learned, in the years since Bertrand, that saying things too soon was a way of spending them before they were earned. But she thought it, standing in the yard with the wood in her arms, and let the thought be a quiet thing. Inside, she found that Lowell had put a second chair by the window. Her chair, which usually sat alone on the other side of the room. Not close to his, not far. A reasonable distance. He didn't say anything about it. He was reading. She sat down. She had brought her mending from upstairs. They sat in the late afternoon light, the two of them, the stove ticking, the wind finished. There was a morning, some weeks later, when she was filling the water pail at the pump, and she heard him in the forge. The rhythm of the hammer on the iron, steady, 1-2-1, the pause and reposition, the 2-1-1 again. She had been hearing it for a month by then, and she had stopped hearing it the way you stop hearing things that become part of the sound of where you live. But that morning she heard it again, really heard it, and she put down the bucket and stood in the cold and listened. She had a moment, she did not know how to describe it even in her own mind, of something unlocking. The way a window that has been painted shut for years will sometimes on a warm day give. She picked up the bucket and went inside. That evening he came in and sat at the table and she put the soup on and they ate, and she looked at him across the table and thought, I could tell him something. It was not a decision so much as a direction. She said, I had a husband before. He looked up. He was a fisherman, she said. He died 3 years ago. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she thought he might not say anything, that it would just go in and settle the way most things did with him. Then he said, I wondered, why? He looked at his bowl. You're very good at being in a house with someone who's not there. She thought about that. She thought about Bertrand and the winters she had kept the lamp burning and what it had done to her, not broken her exactly, more like reformed her, the way iron reforms under heat, harder in the places where the hammer fell most. She thought about the creek in January and the way the cold cracked branches in the dark and the recipe card in the pantry in a dead woman's handwriting and how she had made the bannock anyway because that was how she was made now. Yes, she said. I am. He looked at her. His expression was the careful one, the one he used to assess things. Bridles, wheel rims, but there was something else underneath it now, something she thought might take a while to name. I'm glad you came, he said. It was not a practice thing to say. It came out slightly wrong, slightly bare, which is what made her believe it. She said, I'm glad the train was on time. He made a sound that might have been almost a laugh. She cleared the plates. That spring the cold water rose and did take the lower field, just as Dunston had told her, water over the fence posts, a whole pasture gone to mud and ice grass. She and Lowell spent a morning moving hay bales to the high side of the barn, working without speaking, each knowing what the other was about to need before it was said. When it was done, they stood in the barn door and looked out at the brown water moving slow and wide across the land. His arm was close to hers. Not touching, close. Dunston came by on horseback that afternoon to check the road and stopped at the gate and waved. She waved back from the porch. He looked at her for a moment, then at the smoke coming from the forge shed, and he nodded and rode on. She went inside. On the kitchen shelf, between the salt and the tin of baking powder, she had put a small thing she had brought from Newfoundland. A piece of blue sea glass, worn smooth, the size of a thumbnail. It had been Bertrand's, found in his coat pocket when she went through his things. She had carried it for 3 years without knowing why. She looked at it now. She looked at it the way you look at something you have been carrying so long that one day you set it down, not because you decided to, but because your hand simply opened. She left it there on the shelf. She went to put the kettle on. Outside, the hammer started again. 1 to 1, the pause, the steady remaking of things. She listened to it, and she did not feel like a stranger.